From the early ABA days with Dr. J to the recent adventures of Kevin Durant, James Harden, and Kyrie Irving, the Brooklyn Nets have had no shortage of star power throughout their years. Despite that, the Nets have never won an NBA championship, even with some quality teams throughout their history. The Nets have been on the doorstep of greatness countless times, and yet they've come up short every time. This is the story of the Brooklyn Nets, a team that has a history of failing.
He gets it over to the doctor. Tie ball game. Here's a shot. Julius. He scores! He scores at the buzzer, and the Nets win 120 to 118.
Harris swings it. Place will explode. Dinwiddie!
Coleman with the rebound. To Blaylock. 4 against 1. Morris will go. Cadillac Anderson. Coleman knocks it away. What a feed by Morris. Whoa! He missed the layup and then came up with one incredible speed to Derek.
Timeout to use. Vasquez looking. Still looking. Gets it to Lowry at 5 seconds. Lowry. Williams a tight defense. Here is Lowry on the deck. Through 2. Lowry put it up. It's blocked by Pierce. And the Nets win the series.
The Brooklyn Nets were founded in 1967 as the New Jersey Americans. A year later, they rebranded to the New York Nets. The Nets played in the ABA for 9 seasons, winning 2 of the last 4 finals before the ABA merged with the NBA. In 3 seasons for the Nets, Julius Erving averaged 28 points per game. These Nets were really good. They had won 55 or more games in 3 straight seasons. And they had also made the playoffs for 7 consecutive years. But due to the costs of joining the NBA, the Nets owner did not want to pay Julius Erving a competitive wage compared to other NBA stars. That's when the Philadelphia 76ers came in. They offered to buy the rights to Julius Erving's contract for $3 million, and Erving himself would earn a contract worth $3 million as well. That meant the Nets would be entering the NBA without their star player, and it was one that had won 3 consecutive MVP awards. So without Dr. J, the Nets had a hard time adjusting to the NBA. They had 5 consecutive losing seasons, none of which where they won over 37 games. After this, though, the Nets would finally start to put together a respectable roster. Their key players included Buck Williams, a 3rd overall draft choice, and a forward from the University of North Carolina. They also had Daryl Dawkins, a center from Philly, and Otis Birdsong, a guard that was once on the Kansas City Kings. This group went to the playoffs for 5 consecutive seasons. And though this team never got past the conference semifinals, it was nice to see the now New Jersey Nets find their footing after struggling to get going in the NBA. After this, though, the Nets struggled again. They had a 6-year streak where they failed to make the playoffs, and their aging roster would eventually break up going into the 90s. In 1990, the Nets had the 1st overall pick in the draft, selecting Derek Coleman, and he would be a cornerstone for the team for a few seasons. Over the next 4 years, the Nets made the playoffs 3 times, losing in the first round in each season. They were fine those years, but weren't anything too special, and their playoff record certainly reflected that. After 5 seasons for the Nets, Coleman was traded to the Philadelphia 76ers, and the Nets went into yet another long period of no playoff success, or regular season success for that matter. After 16 years of not winning a playoff series came the 2001 offseason, one that was critical for the New Jersey Nets. In a deal which saw Stephon Marbury get moved to the Phoenix Suns, Jason Kidd, a 4-time All-Star point guard, was now joining the New Jersey Nets. And additionally, the Nets added Richard Jefferson in the late lottery of that same offseason. After winning just 26 games the year before, the Nets had some promise, and they would deliver, winning 52 games that year, which was double the amount they had the year before. Jason Kidd would finish second in MVP voting, and what's really interesting about this roster is that despite winning 52 games, none of their players scored over 15 points per game. In the playoffs, the Nets also did pretty well. They beat the Pacers in 5 games in the first series before playing the Charlotte Hornets in the second series, winning 4-1. After that, the Nets played the Celtics in the conference finals, winning in 6 games. But that was before playing the Kobe and Shaq Lakers, who they would not be able to beat. That team was just too strong. But even despite that, it was still seen as a massive overachievement that year. The projected win-loss total for the Nets before the season was 35.5 games. So to win 52 games was unexpected, as well to make it all the way to the NBA Finals. And the following year, the Nets would make it to the finals once again. While the Nets only won 49 games in the regular season that year, they only lost 2 games on the way to the NBA Finals before losing to the Spurs in 6 games. So after a 16-year-long stretch of not winning a playoff series, the New Jersey Nets bounced back, making it to the NBA Finals 2 years in a row. And in the years following this, the Nets would maintain at least some level of playoff success, although they wouldn't make an NBA Finals again during that stretch. "2007 marked the beginning of a rebuild for the New Jersey Nets. It saw Jason Kidd traded mid-season to the Dallas Mavericks. The main piece that the Nets got in return was 24-year-old starting point guard Devin Harris. In the following offseason, the Nets added big man Brook Lopez through the draft. Still, this team was very, very bad, and it would continue to show. The team won only 34 games in 08-09 before having one of the worst teams in NBA history, finishing 12-70 the year after. After 2 more seasons of sub-25 win basketball, the Nets started to turn things around a little bit. They re-signed point guard Deron Williams to a 5-year, $100 million contract in 2012, also re-signing Brook Lopez. That same offseason, the Nets added 3 key players: Gerald Wallace, Andre Blatche, and Joe Johnson. The team would win nearly 50 games that season, but unfortunately lost in the first round of the playoffs. So going into the 2013-14 offseason, the Nets wanted to build on their success. They already had a core of Deron Williams and Brook Lopez, as well as Joe Johnson, so adding a few other key players could really help them on a championship run. After hiring Jason Kidd, a former star for the Nets, the team made a trade, one that they believed could push them over the top. The now Brooklyn Nets had acquired Kevin Garnett and Paul Pierce from the Boston Celtics. In exchange, the Nets sent Gerald Wallace, Chris Humphries, Reggie Evans, and up to 4 unprotected first-round picks. While it was a steep price, it was still going to be a worthwhile trade so long as the Brooklyn Nets won an NBA championship, which they had decent odds of doing now. Unfortunately for Brooklyn, though, things would go south pretty quick. While the team did win a first-round series, Deron Williams took a step back, as well as Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett. Brook Lopez only played 17 games as well, so a team that had championship aspirations only won a single playoff series. And while that's a minor success, it's not worth the 4 first-round picks that the Nets gave up in order to get Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett in the first place. Pierce averaged 13 points per game that year, while Kevin Garnett averaged less than 7 points per game. With both of those guys over 35 years old, it wasn't looking like the Nets were optimistic about the deal that they made. And as the core that the Nets assembled regressed, the deal looked even more disastrous. Brooklyn failed to win over 30 games in a single season from 2015 to 2018, meaning they were handing the Celtics more than quality picks. And in 2017, they even handed the Celtics the first overall pick. That was something that the 28-win Nets could have certainly used. The Celtics would use 2 of the picks acquired in the Nets trade on Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, both of whom are all-stars and still on the Celtics. Not having those picks made it a lot harder for the Nets to rebuild after their core was deteriorated. The Nets still found a way to put a somewhat watchable team on the court, but nothing they could do could reverse the damage that was trading those picks. That deal is a microcosm of what teams do in order to maximize a championship window, and they did it to an extreme effect. The following 2 seasons would see the Nets be a little bit more competitive. While they only won 28 games in 2017-18, they won over 40 games and had a winning record the year after that, in part because of the all-star level play of newly acquired point guard D'Angelo Russell. The team was pretty competitive, although they did lose to the Philadelphia 76ers in the first round of the playoffs that year. With this newfound success, they were able to become an attractive free agency destination. And that's where we get to the next part of this story. Going into the 2019 NBA offseason, everybody's eyes were fixated on where Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving would go. The rumor was that they wanted to play together and go to the same team. Both of the New York teams, the Knicks and the Nets, had the cap space to add both players. But the Nets had the better supporting cast, and the Knicks had James Dolan. That made the choice an easy one for both players. Additionally, the team signed DeAndre Jordan and Taurean Prince while adding Nicholas Claxton through the draft. And while the Nets did have to sacrifice D'Angelo Russell in order to bring on all of these players, it was still considered a massive win for the Nets, who had signed 2 of the best players in free agency. So with both Durant and Irving being considered among the best at their position, this Nets team was viewed as one that could make a championship run. And while the team did underperform, they never had the consistency of having both Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant fully available for the majority of the season. So they finished 35-37, losing in the first round to the Toronto Raptors in only 4 games. Of course, it must be mentioned that the series was in the bubble, and neither Kevin Durant nor Kyrie Irving were present for it. And so the following season, the Nets had bigger expectations, where they were actually expected to contend. And then on January 14th, with a 7-6 record, the Nets decided to make another trade. This time it was for All-NBA guard James Harden. Brooklyn sent Jarrett Allen, Karis LeVert, and more than 3 first-round picks, all for only James Harden. So less than a decade after trading 3 unprotected first-round picks for an aging Kevin Garnett and Paul Pierce, the Nets had made another move to go all in once again, this time only amplifying their championship or bust attitude. And this year they would improve in the playoffs, only marginally this time though. In the first round they beat the Boston Celtics in 5 games, but they would squander a 2-0 lead over the Milwaukee Bucks in the second round, with Kyrie Irving and James Harden both missing games. Now, in year 3, there weren't any excuses. The Brooklyn Nets were the title favorites going into the season. There was a whole offseason for Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant, and James Harden to build chemistry, and the roster also got better. The team had re-signed Kevin Durant to a long-term deal, as well as bringing in Patty Mills and Paul Millsap. But there were some under-the-surface tensions. Harden, just a year and a half into his tenure with the Nets, asked to be traded before the deadline, and the Nets would grant his wish. On deadline day, the Brooklyn Nets decided to trade Harden to the Philadelphia 76ers for a package that included Ben Simmons and a few first-round draft selections. So after only a year and a half of playing together, only playing 2 playoff series as a team, and being the championship favorites entering 2021, the so-called super team was already done. But even so, the Nets still had talent. They still had the original duo of Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. But when the 2022 playoffs rolled around, it wasn't pretty. The Celtics swept the Nets in the first round 4-0. That seemed like the beginning of the end. Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant would be traded before the trade deadline of the following season. Now the Nets don't have any star players. They've got some good ones, but nothing enough to where they would make noise in the playoffs. That means that in a span of a decade, the Nets made 2 separate trades to give away 3 or more first-round picks in an effort to win a championship, with neither of those trades ending up in one. It's unfortunate for the Nets, but they could not find their way. There are so many reasons the Nets haven't ever won a championship. From pushing away Dr. J to adding just one wrong piece, it's always seemed like the Nets have been closer to a ring than what reality actually says. You can point to bad trades, but it only goes to show the desperation of a franchise to win a championship. Everything the Nets have done has been in an effort to do so. You have to respect the ability to push in all of your chips, despite it ending up being the wrong bet. It's not easy to win an NBA championship. Only one team can do so every year. You can call it bad luck, but for me, I call it a disappointment. I call it a failure.
And the Nets win 120 to 118.
Hey everybody, I appreciate you watching. Please like, subscribe, comment, that sort of deal. I've kind of been looking through kind of ways to branch out. So if you would enjoy like a kind of podcast sort of thing from me, comment down below. I'm kind of looking through all that. All of the music in this video featured is made by Edna Cargill. Please check out the Bandcamp for that in the description below. Also check out my Twitter at dj.png and the Patreon as well, which is linked. Once again, thank you and much love.